Hello, listeners and readers of AwardsWatch.com. This is the Awards Watch Podcast, episode 238. I'm your executive editor, Ryan McQuade, and joining me is Josh Parham.
Hello, hello.
That's it. That's all you get this week. But that's really enough, right? Like, you don't need anybody else other than me and Josh. Honestly, you probably just want Josh more than you just want me, right, Josh? You think you could do it?
Suggest more people.
Could you do it solo?
That would be a challenge, but if pressed, I'm sure I could do it.
I would never do an episode solo. I would just cancel the show for a week because nobody wants to hear Ryan just ramble on even more by himself and no one to cut him off or like Josh does, keep me in check for for an episode, because that could be our longest episode if you really got it to it. It would, especially with like the topics that we're going to talk about today, which is we're talking about two new releases, which is the new Yorgos Lanthimos film, Kinds of Kindness, and then we're also going to talk about Kevin Costner's Horizon, and then we're going to do, inspired by Horizon, we're going to talk about our top 5 Westerns. Yeah, it's a pre-4th of July week. Josh, how's everything going with you, man? Feels like I haven't talked to you in a while.
Yeah, going well. Some busy parts in life like we all go through, but honestly, I still feel weirdly like, even though it's been a month, still decompressing from Cannes, to be honest. I mean, it was a wonderful experience. I did love it, but there are some days where I do kind of feel like that scene from The Hurt Locker where Jeremy Renner's in the
he's trying to pick her out like wood cereal. You know what I mean?
And it's like his mind is still back in the battlefield. I mean, there are some days where it does feel like, man, I actually do sort of miss the rush and the craziness of it. And as much as I wanted to get out of it, I do miss it a little bit still at the same time.
I need the flash cut of Josh just walking back on, in Cannes, just like slow motion with like heavy gear ready to go again after you can't pick
just
the cereal.
All the crowds of lining up to the different theaters that are,
and they're all looking at Josh
in the background.
They're not looking at anybody else, baby.
Yeah.
God, that is a dream. No, I just thought that you're also trying to recover from that last episode you were on, which was the best director ranking, and and it took him a couple of weeks to come back, which is fine.
I mean, the amount of time we recorded for it probably was enough to bank in a couple episodes to take off.
That's fair. We literally did split that, so then it was just like, okay, well then everybody's got another week off to recover from one of the more insane recordings that we've ever done here. But
very fun.
Very fun. We enjoyed it.
But you have to buckle in and know that they're going to be long.
Yeah. I mean, there were some conversations I'm still like, I can't believe we talked about that person for that long. And yet, here we are. Let's talk about the first big release this week, which is Yorgos Lanthimos' Kinds of Kindness. It looks like it's doing decently in a limited run. This, of course, stars Emma Stone and Jesse Plemons and Margaret Qualley and Willem Dafoe and Chau and a bunch of other great actors in this ensemble. And it is a anthology film, Josh, and his follow-up to Poor Things, which came out last year and did really well in the award season. Emma Stone wins Best Actress, but now it's an anthology. It's 3 different stories kind of put together. And so, Josh, I got to ask you, did Kinds of Kindness work for you?
I would say overall it did. I did like the movie. I did not find myself loving it. I think with every anthology movie, you're always going to run into the situation where some of the sections are going to be stronger than others, and I definitely felt that here. I think that the first and the third one were really effective for me, especially the first one, which sort of has the main focus on Jesse Plemons. I really liked that one. I really did enjoy the last one. The middle one, I don't know.
Oh, it's the middle one that got you.
Yeah, the middle one is where I'm like, I'm not sure exactly what they're trying to say here, and they're kind of doing it in a very muddled way, and I did not find that to be particularly effective. But I still really liked the overall kind of deadpan humor. I did enjoy that Lanthimos was really returning back to those pre Tony McNamara roots, which
Yeah,
I really appreciate.
yeah,
So it to me, it really did feel like somebody who's kind of said to themselves, I've been doing one thing for a while. Let me kind of grab this crew and we can make something that's like shaggy and a little bit more weird and kind of sort of do this as a experiment to get the creative juices flowing again in the way that
yeah.
they used to be. That's kind of what it felt like. So the end result is something that I did enjoy watching, but I did not find myself thinking it was an incredible piece of work, but still good at the end of the day.
I thought it was fine. I agree. The three sections that we're talking about here. One is the first section that follows Jesse Plemons and sort of him and his relationship with Willem Dafoe, who plays his boss. And by the way, the same cast is in all three stories. They're just playing different characters for the most part. And so Plemons' kind of world is going out of control because he won't do this task that his boss and maybe more than just a boss, Willem Dafoe wants him to do. The second is about a husband played by Jesse Plemons whose wife goes missing and is reunited with him, and his wife is played by Emma Stone, and sort of their relationship after she comes home, right, Josh? I guess is the best way to say that. And then and there's obviously more stuff to that, but this is just basic sort of stuff. And then like the third one follows Emma Stone mostly, but Emma Stone and Jesse Plemons and Hong Chau and Willem Dafoe as they are part of a cult. Did I kind of get that right?
Yeah, Willem Dafoe and Hong Chau are they run this cult that the two of them are in, and Plemons and Stone are off to find this person who can have the ability to raise the dead, essentially. That will give them greater standing in this cult, and it's a really big obsession with the Emma Stone character.
Yeah, and they're like drinking water that's essentially tears, which I don't recommend out there, folks. That's not smart. But I thought the first section was the best section.
I
And
agree.
and I think that the reason why is because of a true discovery in the Yorgos Lanthimos canon, which is that Jesse Plemons is perfect for this sort of quirky, weird style that Lanthimos works with. And you're right, he's working with the same sort of screenwriting team and creative team behind like Killing of a Sacred Deer, Dogtooth, The Lobster. So it is more in that vein than the sort of traditional gonzo spectacle that has been The Favorite and Poor Things working with Tony McNamara. And I think Plemons now firmly can take the reins over as maybe our great character actor that we have working today. I think that those reins have been kind of sitting back for a while since we lost somebody like Philip Seymour Hoffman. It only makes sense that he kind of falls in his shoes because he played his son in The Master. But I don't know. Plemons for me, I was just watching him, and he has that. It was like watching Sandler in Punch Drunk Love. You know, there's all this torment and terror happening to him around him, and his world is going upside down. And yet Plemons plays it so at times wicked and very clumsily that I was I was so enthralled with him, and he's so great with Defoe. The second part is when the movie starts becoming, and this is going to sound like a backhanded thing, and I'm just going to finally say it, Josh. It starts becoming less about Plemons being the lead of these stories, and he starts sharing the screen with Emma Stone. And then the third part happens, and it's really her show. And that's when I was like, I don't want to see this anymore. I think I'm over the collaboration between Emma Stone, and Yorgos Lanthimos, who just seems like completely miscast in these latter two sections, because I think that she fits better in the Tony McNamara sort of structures of those stories. But as we get to these sort of weirder ones, it feels like it's being forced rather for me. And I thought that someone like Margaret Qualley would have easily knocked those two parts out of the park, because I think she's really great in her moments, and she's wasted, I think, in really all of them, but especially the second part. She's really just like a dinner guest, literally, in the second part. And I was kind of thinking, because of her previous work, she would have, and also it seemed like she had really good chemistry with Plemons. Like, that could have been really good. Hunter Schafer is in this for like a scene in the third part.
A scene.
And I was like, I kind of would have liked to seen them. It's not that I think Emma Stone's a bad actress or anything, but I think I've seen her enough in the weird, wonderful, fantastical worlds that Lanthimos has created to now, when we get to a modern setting, it just didn't feel right. And I was thinking of other actresses, and sort of also too, I think the momentum by you start focusing on her more in especially the last part, it all kind of crumbles. And I get that these are all supposed to be about control and everything, Josh, but I honestly just didn't feel like they connected or there was a point to really any of them. And they all felt like half-baked ideas that should have just been maybe features rather than shorts.
Well, I do think that you can find some thematic value in all of them. I think it is most strong in that first one, which is why I like it the most, because what I like about that first section is you get like a very basic story, the outline of it, but underneath it, I think is a really interesting examination of how we seek control and how much control we actually want in our lives, and what happens when this search for free will is actually given to us, and what those consequences mean. And I think it's all delivered in a setting that's like just offbeat enough where it kind of looks like the everyday world, but there's something, a little that's not quite right with things. And it kind of reminded me actually very much of the Twilight Zone. All three of them did to a certain extent. And so I liked that about the first section. And I do think as it goes on, it loses it a little bit. Like, I really don't know what the point of the second one was supposed to be.
No, because
it felt like it had
the ending, right? The ending is just like, wait, what? And it just ends, and you're like, that, like, it sort of tried to by the end feel like it was going to be like a Phantom Thread kind of reveal or something, and then it just like, no, we need the simplest way to get out of this thing, and it was really weird.
Yeah, it felt to me that it was almost there to say something about the nature of relationships, and sort of how, as you're in it for a long time, your partner might feel like a completely different person, and you can't articulate exactly why that is, what you're investigating. That, like, that's a really interesting idea, but it is really undercut by the last like few seconds of that, where they do this reveal, and it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense.
No,
the theme that you were working with, which would have been interesting, does not make any sense if you go with that ending. And when it's already a struggle to justify why I'm watching it anyway, because I'm not really that engaged to begin with, now the theme is completely gone. So that one kind of felt like a bit of a waste of time, honestly. Like, that was the one that really felt as if they were just doing stupid shit and we're just like, yeah, we're just playing around, but without really anything to follow through on.
I mean, like, that's where, like, kind of the more scandalous, there's a sex scene in that sequence that happens. And I was sitting there thinking about the first half of that story, and before Stone is returned home, right? And then it takes a completely different turn from what the first half felt like. And I was kind of like, it felt like they were going to explore more with the other couple, and maybe that with the relationship dynamic and losing control over that, and found that could have been really interesting. Defoe's character in that plays Stone's father, and there's a weird relationship there that just kind of doesn't get explored enough either. You're right. Like, I think that each one of these could have benefited probably from 20 minutes and just being a movie extra, right? Because, like, I think that the cult thing is actually really interesting. The rules of that world, like the idea of all that, but there's this giant part of it that is with Emma Stone and her previous family, and Joe Allen, who's one of the members of this ensemble. And it's the thing about Lanthimos is that he does certain things in his movies, and it can be really putting an audience off. Like, it could really upset them. And there's a scene, particularly in the third part, that happens, and it's the way in which that story goes forward. And I'm not, Josh, I'm not one of those people, you know this, where like everything's got to be pure and everything's got to be like, squeaky clean in my movies. But that just felt like Wicked to just be Wicked. It didn't seem like there was actual like a point to it, or there wasn't like a quirky quality that was found in the other two sections. It felt like to be mean, just to be mean to this character almost and punish him.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's how we're going to drive this momentum of this story forward as well.
Are you talking about the ending?
I'm talking about the act in the middle of the third story, that is when she's quote unquote reignited with Joe Allen.
Okay, I definitely agree with
I don't want to spoil it, and I'm trying to walk around the spoilers. Sorry for everybody. It's just I know it's close to being nationwide, but it's
well, I mean, for a movie like this, like
for a movie like this, too. Yeah, I know, but
general term.
Yes, but I know that Lanthimos has a following. He's huge on. He's he's a brand now within himself. He has a distinctive style, and he has a fan base of people that really do love his movies. I'm always fascinated by a new Yorgos Lanthimos movie. I never can always say I'm the huge admirer or fan of his work. I think that he is asking always interesting questions, and he's doing more than just the story that's on the page, right? He's trying to tackle all these different things. I just think that the first one would have made a really great 90-minute movie, and could have
a premise that you would see in a Lanthimos.
Well, and it has a world where it could branch out. You could add a little bit more, and you could talk about control, and it's a rule system that feels so connected within power dynamics and struggles. That's why Plemons can't get away from the shadow of it when he's trying to grab essentially freedom away from Dafoe. And there's consequences to that. And it's ridiculous consequences. And that's what's kind of great about him.
Yeah.
And that's also too where like that's Dafoe being menacing and horny at the same time. It's great. Like, I'm sitting there going like, oh, this rules. And there's these weird gifts involved, and sort of, talking about the different kind of ways of like, love responses, like, are you a touch person? Are you a gift person? Are you, is it, what's your love language? Right. And I felt like that was a really interesting story. And I could have just stayed there the whole time, because you're right, Josh. There's like this, in all three of these stories, there's this sort of hyper realized world that they're living in inside our world, right?
Yeah.
And then these stories are also connected by really the loosest thread possible.
Which is fine.
Which is fine, but it's like, but it just feels like tacked on, like at the end, really. And I was just like, you don't really need to even do that. You can just like,
I mean, you don't. I fully believe that is just like a little joke to be like, here is our connective tissue, this
yeah,
one character who shows up barely in all of them. Like I think structurally speaking, that's fine. I think it's just more so that internally within all of those stories, the sense of, as you said, momentum is not consistent.
yeah.
And that's the bigger issue that I have. I do just want to also say I will stick up for Emma Stone a little bit more in
Okay.
this. I definitely do understand your perspective, and there is a part of me that is thinking like, man, it would actually be interesting if Margaret Qualley was in this movie more because she really is becoming like one of my favorite actors now
She
she
fits the
also had another.
mold. Like she feels like she should get a showcase in one of these Lanthimos movies. Like
Oh, for
really.
sure.
Yeah.
And she had another movie at Cannes too, The Substance, that she was really good in. And
Yeah, at first
I
she's
just
really
saw
good in
Drive
that.
Away Dolls for the first time. And I think that movie's okay, but she is excellent in it. So I really
I
do
still gotta
love.
catch up with that thing.
Yeah,
It's a Coen
I
Brother
think the
movie.
movie itself is okay, but she is really, really good. So I
Okay.
love her as an actress. I do agree that she could have had more to do, but I think Emma Stone, especially the last one, I don't know. I understood that she was definitely kind of just going for the weird offbeat energy that is not really there in their previous collaborations, but I still found her to be very compelling. I still thought that what she was given was still really interesting to me. And yeah, maybe it's not my favorite element of the movie, but I think when it is for her to like still commit to it, I still
Hmm.
thought she did a great job. Like one of my favorite scenes actually is, I won't say everything that happens in terms of the context, but I'll just say it's the scene of her outside
Oh,
the
outside the
cult
gate.
home and she's trying to convince them to let her back in. And all that she's doing in that scene, I thought was hilarious, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think that she's committed there. It just and it's probably the writing and that part. I'm like it. I don't know. There was something off about it. From also, she shouldn't have played the character in the first section either. It felt very weirdly miscast. It just felt like very jarring to just throw her in there for like 2 seconds, rather than and I don't know. And
But
for that,
I like the implications of that character though at the
I
same
do,
time,
I
and
do.
what it had to say about the
Yeah.
overall like world that story took place in.
See, that's where I was like, man, Hunter Schafer would have been really good in like that part. You know what I mean? Or Qualley in the Stone part in the second part. And then maybe Stones just gets the third one by herself. You know what I mean? But I don't know. She's just got to have those weird little dances in there, like, and it's kind of like in her rider now, dance weirdly. It feels like it just feels. I'm gonna say this, and I know it's just gonna sound bad, but I don't buy it. I didn't buy it one bit that she could. It felt forced, and I don't know. I've just seen her enough in these to like. I think she works better with the McNamara material rather than this material,
I can
and
agree with that to a
yeah,
certain extent.
and
Yeah.
I think that those collaborations are more fully fledged characters, and these are supposed to be more archetypes and things of that nature. And I don't know. There was just something about like I was thinking of other actresses more than I was thinking about her, and I think that that's and she's for better or worse. I'm not. We're getting more of her with Plemons in his next movie. This is his muse, and he loves working with her, and so
And she
well,
loves working with
and she
him
loves working
too.
with him, and so
Yeah.
they have I just think that maybe for the anthology movie, maybe it would be better if it's just a narrative, and maybe that's just the casualty of an anthology movie is you're going to like certain actors for that and others, and the problem is that and this this is the problem is that anytime she's on screen with Jesse Plemons, he's just the more interesting, weird. He gets the tone completely. There's like not a note I can give Jesse Plemons in all three stories because he just gets it. And and that's, I think, working with the directors he's worked with, especially, he's been in a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, and I'm telling you, at times I was feeling the Punch Drunk Love, Inherent Vice kind of energy, the looseness of those movies inside this movie at times with Plemons, and it's like, he's just one of our great character actors, Josh, that we have working today, and I understood why he won the Best Actor prize at Cannes, because it's like, there maybe is, little holes here you could, talk about with this movie. But there's no denying that this is a showcase to, like, Hollywood, please give Jesse Plemons more leading man roles. And I was just sitting there going, like, he is on the Philip Seymour Hoffman trajectory. He has been this character actor in these small roles, supporting roles, and now he's in an ensemble piece, and he's one of the more talked about pieces of that. He's going to get lead roles here very soon and probably get an Oscar or two when it's all said and done.
He does feel like he is like a Capote away from.
I was just going to
really
say,
breaking through.
He is real close to talking about the murders. You know what I mean? Like, he's really, really close to that. Kinds of Kindness in theaters. Go see it. It's a lengthy one. It's like 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Yeah. It's got three.
It's got three stories, though.
It's like three short films in it. So, yeah. Well, can I ask one question?
Yeah, you can ask a question real quick.
Just what is your favorite Lanthimos movie?
Ooh. See, that's the thing about Lanthimos, too, is like I have enjoyable experiences with his first viewings, and then I don't return to those movies a lot. Just because, like, I don't inherently think that they're, like, really rewatchable. So, but I will say that, like, I really like The Lobster. And
okay. I'm very glad you said that, because that was also going to be my answer, but I had to caveat it with saying, yes, everybody expected me to pick the one with Ben Whishaw in it.
I was going to say,
I do genuinely think that is his best movie.
I would say that. I do really like The Favorite.
Mm-hmm. That would be second for me.
And I like Killing of a Sacred Deer. I like that sort of 3-film stretch. Like that, Killing of a Sacred Deer is kind of like what it's the fleshed out version of one of these stories. Really, when you think about it, it's a fantastical rule setting, and you're allowed those characters the time to create whatever darkly comedic, sinister storyline that thing is. And so, like, that's why I was like, if we could have just got the first part 20 more minutes, we might have had something along those lines. And I actually will say I prefer this version of Lanthimos more than the McNamara era, if that makes sense. Like, I like this version. It's not always going to hit, because, like, the third section has a really mean bit of storytelling involved. But Josh, I kind of think that he takes more swings in this era, or these kind of stories, or this type of collaborations, more than the sort of, traditional button-up versions of, like, the McNamara stories that he obviously then adds his own spin on it, for sure. But does that make sense? Like, I like the like the weird modern stuff a little bit more.
Yeah, it's like, do you want him pure or do you want him filtered? That's sort of
a little bit, and he's more involved in the storytelling here. Not that he's not involved in those, but he's more.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't.
His name's on the script
as the writer for the McNamara stuff.
No,
and here he is. So yeah, it's a different kind of sensibility. I definitely would say that just in terms of overall broader success, that the McNamara stuff,
that's worked for him.
It is more mass appealing. But I agree that there is something to just the pure weirdness of Lanthimos, and that is something that, despite all of the flaws in Kinds of Kindness, I do appreciate. I like that it is a return to the more offbeat, weird sensibilities that he has always had, that has gotten pushed aside a little bit with stuff like The Favorite and Poor Thing. So it's flawed, but I do at least appreciate that sensibility returning, because I do find it to be fascinating.
Absolutely. Kinds of Kindness is in theaters. Check it out. It's 2 hours and 45 minutes, like I said. And speaking of long movies, is our next film Horizon, an American Saga Chapter 1. Did I get that right?
I believe that is the full title, yes.
Based on the novel Push by Sapphire. This is... Josh, this is a big one to talk about, I think, because there's so much you can actually talk about with Kevin Costner.
Yeah.
In the lead up to this movie, there was stuff this week, some comments that he made to journalists about the representation in this movie that doesn't quite check out, probably. But Kevin Costner is one of the more fascinating people that we have working in the industry, and always has been. Plays by his own kind of set of rules. I think that this is a very interesting endeavor that he's going on. He basically is betting on himself and sidestepping one of the most popular television shows on the planet in its final run or continuing run.
Yeah.
To make $400 million 3-hour westerns and give them 2 parts at a time to audiences in a given year. Chapter 1 is released this past weekend. Chapter 2 releases in 6 weeks, and sometime in August. And then he is filming 3 and 4 right now, barring.
Well, he's filming 3 right now. I think he still might have the
trying to get the money
panhandle out, trying to get the loose change to get.
Yeah, he's just trying to be like, "Come on, guys, give me the money." Yeah. And he was kind of on a campaign for that at Cannes, and
he absolutely was. He literally said, "I'm here to go on yachts and beg for money."
Exactly, to make this movie. This movie is 3 hours long. It was received, let's just say, not great to mixed at Cannes.
No, it was panned at Cannes.
Yeah,
I was there.
Okay. I was trying to be nice to Mr. Costner.
No, that's all right, because I will supply the niceness a little bit later,
there you go.
But I can set it up properly in terms of how that movie was received.
Yeah, it was just not received well. Though I think the sentiment for him is that there were, and Josh, you were there at Cannes, so maybe you can speak to this more than I do. It felt that the movie was not good by people's reactions, but there was a complete admiration. It was very much like Megalopolis. There was a lot of appreciation, admiration for the artist that made it, and it felt like that was in the case of at the press conference, the long-standing ovation. Costner cried with that little mustache of his on. Like it felt like there was at least appreciation for the idea of trying to go and make a venture like this. But now it's in theaters, and it's not doing well at the box office. Thank God none of us picked it for the draft. We'd be screwed. But actually might have been a good bomb pick at this point. And I'm just going to say this up front too. Wasn't screened for critics here in America. So good strategy there, Kevin. To get people on this side. It seems like the strongest reviews are coming from right-wing propaganda websites, from what I can tell. It's part of literally the marketing campaign which is sad. You know what I mean?
Very disheartening, considering there were people that did like it out of Cannes, and maybe would have appreciated that a little bit more of a highlight than what they went with. But okay,
yeah,
it was like whatever you got to do. But it's
like you have good reviews, you can find them. You don't have to go to the scum of the earth. You know what I mean? To get them.
I mean, I guess Glenn Beck is the better option. Okay.
Listen, Josh, I just don't think you're putting enough conspiracy theories inside of your reviews, and
I guess so.
We'll talk about it off air. Air. We'll get him in there, buddy. Don't worry. But now it's here, 3 hours. Josh, Horizon. I know that you're a defender of this. So what did you like about Chapter 1?
I am a big defender of this, which, believe me,
I'm shocked. I'm shocked you are a defender of this. I'm going to put this on the record. This was a movie Josh and I low-key had been making fun of for a good while before he went to Cannes. To find out that you like this made me so curious to see this, by the way. You were actually more of a driving force than any of the marketing for me to see this, Josh, was your reaction to it. Not putting any pressure on you, just Just
No,
saying.
and I fully am aware that my reaction is an outlier. Like I definitely understand that because out of Cannes, that movie just got panned by nearly everybody who saw it, and I was one of the very, very few that not only liked it, but like kind of borderline loved it. Like, maybe not quite that far, but I really, really enjoyed the movie. And I definitely understand people's complaints about it feeling bloated and that it meanders and that it gives you all this introduction with no real follow through because it's only part one. Like, I do understand that. But I think for me, I just really bought into the scope of the story that Costner clearly wanted to tell. And even though, yes, it includes so many characters and it has all these threads that you have to follow and it feels like too big, I liked that expansiveness of it. I liked that he was trying to tell a story that really was about what life was at this time and what kind of striving for the quote unquote American dream was. Like I love the fact that Horizon is this town that it feels a little nondescript, but it's just like come here because that's what you have to do as an American, you know? And the very first scenes that we get of this place are just violence. You know, it's constantly fighting, and that's the story of America. It's just constantly fighting over stolen land, you know? And within that framework, you can get personal stories about families trying to survive and what the military is doing and what the natives are battling. And yes, it is very expansive, and you're not going to get everything that you want out of part one. And I'm certainly not going to say it's a perfect movie. I did have some issues with the storytelling in particular, but I think the overall intention of what it was trying to do, I really found myself responding to. I thought that it was a very interesting analysis on that kind of thematic level. And even at 3 hours, I the pacing did not bother me all that much, to be honest with you. I'm not gonna say it flew by, but it did not drag as much as I expected it to. And I just really, really connected to the overall objectives that Coster was going for. And yeah, I really liked it.
So I went to the Alamo Draft House and saw what maybe one of the worst audiences I've ever seen. Because they were all, you know, they were all like 60 to 70-year-old people and they no etiquette whatsoever. And
Well, I feel like that crowd would not know how to behave in a draft house setting, too.
no, there were people next to me that didn't know how to even find their seats, let
Yeah,
alone.
you got to go to like a regular multiplex for that one.
Yeah, that's a regular, like, we're going to the Regal or AMC. We're not going to the Draft
Yeah,
House for it.
like that's the crowd that you got to see the movie with. Because
Yeah, because, like, you know, you're not supposed to talk in there. And I literally, people were sneezing and someone across the theater went like, bless you. And I was just like, okay, all right, I see what I'm dealing with here. And someone had their phone on and like, it was the audience that Costner is going for, which he's essentially making this for older generations.
the people who watch Yellowstone.
Yeah, the people that watch Yellowstone. They did not behave well in this movie. Though it was a 6 o'clock screening, which I was surprised because most of those people it's their bedtime. But it was a 6 o'clock screening. It was like 50 to 60% full. So it was kind of the opposite of what we've been hearing about with this movie with audiences. Like it was a pretty decent crowd. You know, I've seen other movies that have had better box office runs with lesser crowds on an opening night film actually than that. So I was kind of surprised by it. And you know, the pre-show before the film usually hints at the kind of movie, you know, Draft House does a good job of sort of hinting at what you're going to see before. And they were playing clips of How the West Was Won, which is not my favorite Western. Let's just go out there, say that. But it's an interesting concept, which is take three directors with totally distinctive visions, put a giant cast with them, and then kind of have these stories sort of collide. And it's very episodic. It's very television based, but that was a movie made specifically for the big giant cinematic, event and have all these actors that and they're gonna, tell you how the West was won, you know what I mean, and stuff like that. And so that's a big film for Costner as a reference point, and a big film for him wanting to make this kind of event. But the problem is, he doesn't nearly have the star power of a movie like that in this movie. This movie was not marketed really particularly well. I don't know what audience, like, before I walked into the theater, there was the person just one of the people that worked there, and they announced to you, "Hey, theater 1 for such and such movie is open, and you can go inside." Right, Josh? Basic sort of structure.
Yeah.
And I could overhear the girl asking her colleague, "What the hell is this movie titled?" And she didn't even know how to say it out loud. And I kind of sat there and went, that is very telling for this movie and how it's being delivered to everyone. Now, if it was delivered in the intended way that I think it probably should have been, which is not a cinematic experience, but more a episodic miniseries, then I think that this thing would be gangbusters on a streaming platform. And it probably will do really well when it lands on it's going to be on Max, because it's in a Warner Brothers property with New Line. So I think it'll do really well there. But I think that this movie is it's a lot.
I don't deny that.
There's like 5 or 6 storylines. Some of them are really good. Some of them are poorly written. Some characters I wanted to spend more time with. Others I'm like, please tell them to shut up. The Costner stuff, like Costner doesn't show up into this movie until an hour in.
Yeah.
And he literally rides in on a horse. Right into the frame.
I mean, he does get a hero shot.
He gets a big hero shot
into the movie,
and it's great.
I will give him credit for restraint.
But it's great. No, it's great. Like I'm not complaining about it at all. I think that like this is it has to have more of that, right? And it has a lot of those moments of like, this is the setup for what is to come. And much like people had, I guess, a problem with the sort of setup quality of Dune Part 1, right? And that is an incomplete project. This is doubling down on that idea of this is an incomplete project, because it literally is an incomplete project. And this is all just the prologue to get you invested into what I would hope be more meaty, interesting stuff. And Costner is not afraid of having these long epics. His movies and his filmography, if you watch at a certain point, they just start becoming longer and longer and longer and longer movies. If you tried to do a rewatch of his filmography, you would be surprised. Not a lot of 90-minute bangers in there. You know what I mean? And so I think that this movie is a fascinating study more than a good movie at times. It's an interesting kind of project. And I think that the Sienna Miller plotline with Sam Worthington, to me, was probably the strongest. I
really liked it.
I felt I felt a kind of emotional investment to her obviously she's part of like this raid of the Comanches on their little settlement town. And she loses, it's no secret, she loses her husband and her child early on, like 20 minutes into this movie. Yeah. And I felt for her. I felt for her and her daughter. Her connection with Sam Worthington, of all actors, was really good.
I know 2 actors that normally I'm
like allergic.
I don't care about them, but like She was surprisingly effective for me. I honestly think it is one of her best performances. And yeah, they're like little budding romance that they've got going on. I thought was very sweet, and it's one of those things where clearly Costner is kind of going for a throwback here. He wants to evoke those big epic westerns of the past that obviously they're not making anymore. And I think in doing so, he does paint a very large portrait right here. And for a lot of people, that's like too much. There's like kind of too much going on and too many arcs that are not complete because obviously it is a part one. And I absolutely understand that. And to
Mhm.
bring up Dune, it's one of the things that I said there, which is also sort of interesting in my perspective that a lot of people who now suddenly have an issue with an incomplete part one storyline. Okay, that's
Well,
interesting from my perspective.
I will say this about Dune as opposed to this movie. That is a singular plot line for the most part. This is a more sprawling ensemble than that film.
It is.
That
I
story
will
is
agree with that.
This is like you're spending time with the Sienna Miller, Sam Worthington plotline in one location. Another part of the country, you're dealing with Costner and the fallout effects of Jenna Malone and this mysterious, murderous, gangster-like family. Then you're dealing
That
with
she has a child with. She's trying to get out of it.
that she's trying to get out of it.
Down.
Exactly. Then you got Luke Wilson's, people riding into wherever.
Okay, like Luke
go.
Wilson, maybe the most contemporary actor that you could ever put into a Western. I'm sorry, does not fit within this framework at all.
Oh, you didn't like him?
No.
I actually thought Wilson was pretty good for.
To me, every time he showed up, it's like I'm not in the 1800s anymore. Like,
I'm in Bottle Rocket.
Yeah, that's my problem. I don't have an issue with like the character. Obviously, it's just he is a very, very modern actor.
Yeah, I do think though, and then there's the story with the Comanches. There's the story with the people that are a part of the original. That didn't go. The part of the original people that got murdered by the Comanches, they didn't go to the settlement. They're on their own hunting the Comanches. Am I missing? Is there another story? I think that's it. And there looks like there's going to be more storylines. With one of the, I got to tell you this, Josh. One of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen in a movie is the final 5 minutes of this movie, which is the
next time on preview.
The next time on preview that doesn't explain that it's a next time on preview.
Oh, it just happens.
Yeah,
it just like, oh, I guess like doing it.
It just fucking happens, and you're like, wait, no title card or anything. So this is just like, what are we doing here? And I understood it. I understood it, but I don't know if I don't know if people are going to
figure it out eventually.
I guess you so, but you're just like, what the fuck is this?
Honest, for me, I kind of love that decision that it just starts and you're just watching it. It's like, oh, I guess we are just getting a preview of the next movie. I actually love kind of the decision to just be so bold about it and not even telegraph it to the audience.
It's gonzo, but at the same time, I'm like, yeah, I kind of want to buy a ticket to part 2 now.
But like it's this, also that score is amazing. The John Debney score
building up. It's building up. It's like, and then you're like seeing that Costner's like on the run on the horse for part 2, and he's like shooting people from behind. And you're like, holy shit, this looks so good. Why can't I get more of this? And that's the problem with this movie's got really good action sequences inside of it. It really does, and it's got really good moments of character moments.
The whole raid on the town,
it's exceptional. It's exceptional. It's brutal. It's terrifying, and yet, but there's a lot of just kind of like fluff in the middle of this stuff to get you there. You know what I mean? That if it was broken down like hour at a time, like it feels very television. It feels very episodic. It's shot a little bit also like that too. It has. I wish it was shot on film because it is shot on digital cameras. And you can tell, but again, like that would cost more money, and he just doesn't have the resources to do that. And he's doing a lot of this out of his own pocket, which I completely respect, and that's why I want to see all 4 of these films out, Josh. Because even though I'm like in the middle on this thing, because there are parts that I love, there's parts that I don't. It was weird that Costner made this kind of like statements about indigenous representation in movies. When he just released a movie that like is pretty much the same to me at least, it's there's no revolutionary way in which he's depicting them, or he's not giving them really the layers. Like they as a story here, as a side story, they are about maybe 10 minutes total of the entire 3-hour experience. And the more time you spend with them is actually in the raid sequence than understanding their thought process, their world. And maybe we will get that more in the films to come. Maybe we won't. I don't know, because we have Giovanni Ribisi and Glenn Turman to focus on in the preview, and I believe in part 3 and 4, Thomas Hayden Church is supposed to show up at a certain point. But anyway, the point is that those inconsistencies with like characters like that, or some of the other female characters as fault, I'm not saying Kevin Costner is a great screenwriter, because he's not, but he does double down in sort of the problems I have with like a Dances with Wolves, definitely with something like The Postman, his collaboration on the Wyatt Earp film that he did, which is it's devoid of having everybody be a well-rounded character, and wanting to. And I think the problem is like when you watch a television series, you really get invested with all the characters, and that's what. And a big kind of sprawling epic, you want to be with all these characters everybody can attach themselves to. There's maybe one or two many storylines early on in this. He's throwing 6 storylines, and I think the Comanches, who are such a big part of this world, get a little short changed here. And I think his comments are quite silly on like getting mad at everybody for how they sort of. It was like he was saying everyone's too sensitive about portraying them and da 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 da. But it's like, yeah, but you portrayed them as bloodthirsty maniacs in this movie, and that the only thing that you know about them by the end of it is that they just want to continue to kill people. There's no nuance there, at least for me. You know what I mean?
I will. So the first thing that I will say, at least on the subject of kind of the native representation, I do agree that it is a limited scope. I have a sense that it will be expanded upon later in the future chapters, but you're judging by what you get in this part. And I do understand feeling like we don't get as much from that perspective as maybe we would want. For me, and I can only speak for how I interpret it, I do get a sense that this is a group that is going after these people not just because they're bloodthirsty maniacs. I think there is a feeling of land lost and retaliating, and honestly kind of responding to the violence being inflicted upon them with violence in turn. And it is sort of the American narrative as it were. So I thematically I understand it. From a character perspective, I also am sympathetic to wanting more, but I think for me, the foundation that was laid there was enough to kind of understand their perspective, their motivations, and what it means for the overall story. So for that, I that's how I feel about it. Now, in terms of the female representation of this movie, the only part that I really had an issue with was the Marigold character. That's the only part, because of course it's the love interest that Kevin Costner gives himself, and the one sex scene in the movie
I was just gonna say it was very, you know what it reminded me of, weirdly enough, and it's not the same level of quality, but it was kind of like, you remember The Mule? You remember The Mule with Clint Eastwood? Josh is like angry that I'm bringing this, but you know how like Clint Eastwood had like 3 threesomes in that movie, you know, and it kind of felt a little like I'm the only one that's gonna have the sex scene. And it's the most unsexy sex scene that you've seen.
There are multiple threesomes in that movie.
Yeah. It's The Mule is a
that's
a
bad movie.
It's
a terrible.
It's something, all right. I'll tell you that.
Oh
It's
boy.
it's
Like
rough.
racist on so many levels too. It's like you think it's racist on one thing and then it just hits you with something else. It's like, oh wow, man, what a terrible
It's
movie.
yeah, it's a movie made by a 90-year-old man. You know what I mean? Like it's rough. But
Yeah.
also like too, like there were just there also like the Jenna Malone character, the way she's kind of just I assumed handled with by the end of this, it like doesn't explain it. There's some shortchanging though a little bit in the storytelling, Josh, for sure.
And
Uh,
look, I never said the movie was perfect.
no, no,
I
no.
fully cop to there being some flaws within the storytelling for sure. And I do think the script is the weakest element of it, and the way that it not just writes these characters, but I think just sort of constructs the narrative at certain points that can kind of create this little bit of an inconsistency with the pacing. But I think for me, I just really responded to the theme that this movie was trying to explore. Like, I love the idea of looking back at the West and kind of drawing some complicated conclusions as to who was justified in some actions that they were doing. So I very much appreciated that, and I liked that Costner was trying to attempt to go back to this very big, expansive type of filmmaking while also getting some level of nuance in there too. So for me, it really worked. I completely understand why it did not for others. And
Yeah.
believe me, I was expecting I was going to be one of them, but surprisingly, I was won over in a really big way.
Can I tell you someone that I thought was atrocious in this movie,
Please.
and I wanted to kill myself as a character was Jamie Campbell Bower. I thought he was insufferable with every line of dialogue that came out of his mouth. And there's an entire extended scene where he's just walking with Costner. And Costner's a movie star. And he's able to lift terrible dialogue. And it's so funny because he doesn't get much in that scene. And yet the guy writing the dialogue is Costner for this kid, and he's just going on and on and on. And I felt like there was a scene before where Campbell Bower's character won't leave Jenna Malone alone, and his brother keeps like kicking him and moving him away. He keeps going back to the well 3 or 4 times. There's things that just could feel like it could get cut a little bit. You know what I mean? And it's a little long in the tooth. This movie should not be 3 hours long. This should take 30 minutes out. I think you'd be fine. And it would be a little bit tighter, and I think it'd be a little bit more effective, because I do feel like there are certain storylines I was getting so invested in, and I wanted to see their progression, but I have to wait until the next fucking film to see their progression, because we went on these side quests and these things for great action sequences, but honestly, like, really for me, just kind of like, we're just doing an action sequence, or we're just getting to this small town. There's a cut with the Marigold character where she's with this guy, right? In a tent at this camp while Costner's working. I don't know who the hell this guy is. You know what I mean?
Admit, I did not know who he was.
And I still don't know who he is, Josh.
I took note because he was very attractive.
I mean, he was very good looking, but I'm like, the hell is this? And so like, it is a little bit of like, he's got his hands so invested in all these cookie jars and trying to get this perfect machine out that it is a little bit of an imperfect machine. And it's definitely that because it is a part 1 and it's announcing itself that up front. I mean, like, for Christ's sake, we all know Wicked this year is a Wicked part 1. And yet it is trying.
Well, we know the marketing has not.
That's the point. They are doing their damnedest to hide the fact that that is a part 1. And I think people don't like being told that things are in chapters, because to get people to a theater nowadays, you need a cinematic event, a singular cinematic event. And when you see part 1 of something, you just go, well, I can catch that on streaming here in a couple weeks.
I'll just wait till part 2.
Part 2 as well.
Yeah.
And so I don't know about its legs going forward. I got to say this, I will see part 2. Only because my dad wants to see.
Will, yeah.
Well, my dad wants to see part 2. I took him to part 1. He loved it. So Costner's got his vote.
I mean, this is the dad movie.
This is the daddest of dad movie projects of all time. But I did have, I agree with you though. Even though I would cut 30 minutes out, I don't know where I cut it out of, because
you don't know if that 30 minutes actually.
I don't exactly. I don't know where it goes for 2, 3, and 4. It's a incomplete property, and the thing about to going back and using the Dune comparison is, I felt like I got enough in that storyline from the first film that still made me want to go, yeah, I want to continue this and everything. And if we didn't, and there was an uncertainty about part 2 coming out, so I embraced what we had to go forth there. And we knew an angle was going to happen because it was the first part of a book, and the second part of the book came out this year. This is unknown territory, literally, what we're going to see here with this thing. Because yeah, he could be making part 3. There's no guarantee of part 4 and finishing this thing. Who's going to want to finish this thing if it's not making any money? It's an enormous risk and gamble, and I respect the hell out of it. If anyone who does a director series on this show doesn't appreciate the director taking essentially the rest of his career and all of his goodwill that he's built up to make these 4 3-hour movies, that I would assume they're all going to be 3 hours. I got to commend him for it. Do I think it's perfect? No. But damn it, Josh, they got me for part 2 because I'm a sucker for a Western as well.
And one thing about that, like kind of, as we said, the next time on preview, that I also just really loved, outside of them just announcing that it was happening without any fanfare with it, I loved how all of that was also intercut with them continuing to print out the pamphlets about Come to Horizon.
Yes.
And which to me is like the whole underlining message of what this first part is, and what I'm assuming is going to be this whole project, which is all of this stuff is happening under the guise of, isn't America great? We are expanding, we're moving forward, and it's the time of great evolution within the country. And this is what you're striving for. This is the narrative that we are pushing. But of course, you look under it and you see conflict and violence and just misery in every aspect. In some places, you can still find like some likeness for sure, but it's a very big conflict that is happening at the same time. And to see that juxtaposed against the continual printing of flyer after flyer that says, no, come here, think about the good, think about all of the expansion that you personally are going to do, while you see people getting shot and chases and all that. Like, again, I just find that to be a really fascinating examination. And I love that especially with stories that are Westerns. So I think that element just really lifted me to kind of attach myself to the movie in a way that even when I felt it was floundering a little bit, I was still like, no, I'm on board with this. I really am.
Yeah. Gotta tell you that I want them all. I kind of was like, just put on part 2 after that little teaser. It reminded me.
Which, one thing that the teaser actually did also remind me of a little bit, and this is a weird pull for sure, but it also actually reminded me of at the end of Back to the Future Part 2 when they when they do the one for Part 3, when it's all in the Western town. It reminded
me of like the Matrix 2. Because like we knew that was coming out 6 months later, and they attached like the teaser look for that movie at the end of for 3, at the end of 2, and I was like, if you want more of this shit, it's coming soon, and it definitely is. Horizon, an American Saga, Chapter 1. I got it out. Cool.
Yeah.
It's just call it Horizon.
Well, most people are calling it Horizon.
Just call it Horizon. Like, cut out.
But I do think the moniker, at least of an American Saga, I do find.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
That's what the movie is. It's an American saga.
It's about the American myth.
Yeah.
And he's doing his version of it. And I will say it's a hell of a lot better than Dances with Wolves. And it's a hell of a lot better than a hell of a lot better than The Postman. You ever seen The Postman?
I have not, but I know it by reputation.
It's shit. It's horrid. But Open Range, well, I guess we can talk about transition over to our favorite Westerns. Open Range is a really good Western from Costner.
Very good. Yeah.
Top
now,
five
do
West.
you count Waterworld as a Costner movie? He's not officially the director, but
he's pretty much doing it, right? It's one of those like, well, do you count Tombstone as Kurt Russell?
Yeah,
he essentially did that. It's one of those, yeah. Top five Westerns inspired by Horizon. Josh, one of my favorite genres. One of the kind of genres that built Hollywood, really, when you think about it. It is as American a staple in the 30s, 40s, 50s, the 20s even. Like this is the kind of one of the OG original genres. And it goes back and forth between, we have a little bit of run of a couple that come out now. We have times where we don't see them, but it seems to still be like when we can get a good one, they really can still say so much about what's going on currently with us. And I fell in love with Westerns when I was a kid, along with musicals and Bond movies. So much so that it's in my profile on the website. But Josh, I mean, do you have a big fondness for Westerns? Is this one of your favorite genres?
So Westerns for me is one of those things where when I was younger, I actually really wasn't that into them.
Yeah.
And I think the reason is because so many Westerns, at least the ones that I was exposed to when I was younger, had a very simplistic view of their storytelling. And it was a lot of very good versus very bad, very much white hat versus black hat. And that to me just was not very interesting. And for the longest time, I kind of had a resistance to Westerns because of that. As I got older, I definitely started to realize that there are elements to Westerns that I really do love, and particularly the aesthetics to them. I think the scenery and the sets and costumes and cinematography, like all of those, the craft that goes into creating a Western, I really love. And when you can marry that with a more interesting story, then you can create an incredible film. And as I got older, I started to seek those out, the kind of revisionist Westerns, as they're called. And I think those are much more my speed. Like, those are the ones that can utilize the craft that goes into making a Western, but also get this really complex character study at the center of it, too. And when you get that combination, I absolutely love those. So, as a genre overall, I find it to be a bit inconsistent, but it's one of those cases where when it hits, I think it's like some of the best movies ever made.
I have a laundry list of movies. It's probably the longest honorable mention list that we've done for these exercises. It's insane how many that I've seen, that I love, that I appreciate. My five that I picked the ones that I rewatch the most, I think about the most. They're important to cinema, I think. Because I think that this genre speaks so much about really the just where we are as America currently. And the movies that depict them at this time they reflect that. I think that for a couple of my picks, they are literally trying to say something about not just the person creating them, but about the era and about how we are as America moving forward. And they're also just like a great place. And I understand why Costner wants to put all of his chips in the middle of the table. They're a great place to be able to kind of flex your muscles as a director, as a writer, to put great character actors in the center frame of these stories. And I don't know, there's just something about them when, like you're saying, Josh, when they're done right, there ain't much better cinema out there. They are, I think, still an acquired taste, weirdly enough, because they do kind of have a set of rules that are very antiquated and outdated for a lot of people. But there's kind of great nostalgia in the rules that can be created and formed within even modern ones now. So I'm excited to do this because this is just one of my favorite genres, and the fact that we get to do this is probably very indulgent. And so I picked five that I could have picked 30, and I know that IndieWire just did a complete 100 best westerns ranking, and I agreed with that, some of that ranking. I don't agree with all of it, and we'll
Yeah.
talk about it here. I think some of that, I mean, that's just an IndieWire ranking for you in general. There's a lot of like
Yeah.
hoity-toityness to it, but
Also,
it's
some movies that I would say stretch the definition of what a Western is.
well, I think that that's going to be a good question. Did you have
Yeah.
like movies that you penalty boxed and didn't consider for this list?
Yeah. The one major rule that I stuck with is that, at least for me, when I think of Westerns, I do kind of have a very traditional idea of what that
Okay.
is and what that should be. And while I have a lot of respect for the kind of neo Westerns out there, I think that's a different conversation. I think those are kind of a different breed, to be honest. And it doesn't feel right to pick something that is like set in the late 1800s, that is in that setting, with something that is more contemporary, even if it does kind of fit similar story beats and archetypes. So for me, I had a very strict cutoff in terms of how late the time period could be.
Hmm.
So anything that was even approaching stuff contemporary, I kind of just took off. Not to say that those are bad movies, obviously, but I don't think that they really work within what we think of as westerns. If you have to say it's a western, but I don't think that really counts. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with you um, to a certain extent. Um,
Okay, it sounds like a preview of what's coming on your list.
um, well, we'll talk about it, Josh. We'll talk about
Okay,
it.
all right,
So
yeah.
let's jump into it. Josh Parham, you're number five, top westerns.
So as you said, it was actually very difficult to make a top five because there's so
I
many
try to make them
options
difficult for you
available.
guys. I never make them
Yeah.
easy.
And I decided to start my number five off with something that it's a recent movie,
Hmm.
but it to me represents a point of view that we don't normally get a whole lot in westerns, and that's why I went for it. And I really just love this movie, and nobody talks about it anymore. And that is The Harder They Fall.
Oh, okay.
I really like this movie, and of course, this is pretty unique because it is like an all black cast essentially, and it's a perspective of people that we don't normally get to see be the focus in westerns, despite the fact that we know that history is filled with black people as cowboys. In fact, I think there's an argument that like black people and Mexicans are sort of the original cowboys,
Correct.
and the fact that we normally like have just never really gotten that experience and that perspective in movies is very shameful. And I just really love how this movie gives us that perspective, and yet it is still so energetic and fun and just a blast to watch with all these great characters. And it's unfortunate that the lead is problematic now. That makes rewatching the movie a little bit more difficult, but I still think that as a story and just as a piece of filmmaking, it's so riveting to me. And I think that movie is absolutely having a direct conversation with other westerns by some other filmmakers out there that have had a troubled history with some people. I think the movie is making a direct kind of correlation to that. And in doing so, I will admit, I think this film does do some things that are better than maybe that other filmmaker tends to do in this particular realm. And that's another reason why I also really like this movie. And yeah, I think it's so fun. And I love that it gives us this different perspective that we don't normally get to see. And it does so in a very jubilant way that I find to be so compelling.
Vibrant movie. Just very vibrant and violent in its
Yeah.
color palette. And yeah, I do think that you can say it, Josh. I think it is a response to the Tarantino westerns that we've gotten over the last couple of
Particularly
tries.
Django.
Particularly Django Unchained, yes. And a movie that both movies I think are really good and kind of like great companion pieces. An interesting double feature for sure. I think The Harder They Fall is a good movie, and I think Django is. We did a podcast a long time ago, you and I did, and I kind of broke that podcast kind of broke my opinion on Django as like. Yeah, Josh was like really pushing me out. He's like, "Well, yeah, what is this movie saying?" I'm like, "I don't know, Josh. It's just a movie. It's just fun. You know what I mean?" And I think that
my argument was, should a
that's
movie with that
bad.
subject matter be that
fun? And it's like, damn it, I don't know, but it just is. And so,
and they're different kinds of movies for
it's
sure,
different,
with
yeah.
different styles to them. But I do think making that comparison is like, it is impossible to avoid, because I think The Harder They Fall is trying to make that comparison.
Yeah.
And for me, I know that this is not how everybody feels, but for me, I do feel like that The Harder They Fall comes out on top in that regard, because I think it can talk about very similar things that Django Unchained is doing, but get at them in a more meaningful thematic way for me.
It does feel like they are trying to reclaim something that, like you're saying, like that doesn't feel like it belongs to white society, or for the most case in a lot of these
They
movies.
never say the N-word in The Harder They Fall.
No.
Which I thought was an interesting choice.
I think that's a purposeful choice.
I absolutely think it's a purposeful choice.
And I think it's a fascinating film for sure. It's on Netflix, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
My picks are going to be very chalk picks. I'm not going to go crazy. My number 5 is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It's one of the greatest. It's one of the greatest movies of all time. I rewatched it. Okay. So to push back from Josh earlier, I initially thought about No Country for Old Men for this list, because that movie, while it is a modern neo noir
it
western,
technically takes place in 1980, but it has a contemporary setting.
It does. That movie is so of every Western trope in the book, and it's biblical, which is very, very big for the Western genre, and it's so epic in scope. And it comes out in a year that I believe we will be talking about here in a little bit, in 2007, that it's notorious for having some really great Westerns in it. And but I did, as Josh was thinking, as he was talking, I was like, he's kind of right. And I almost didn't have this on there because, I mean, I'm fighting masterpieces at this point on my list. And so yesterday I watched Butch and Sundance for like the first time in maybe like 6-7 years. And it is a perfect movie. There is not a damn thing wrong with it. It moves so, like, I wish Costner would watch Butch and Sundance, because it moves at such a confident pace. It's got the two great movie stars. We just drafted both of them in the movie star draft a couple weeks ago, in Paul Newman and Robert Redford. They are just electric on screen and carry you through these dumb bank robbers' journey from Mexico to Bolivia. And yeah, I mean, what is there to say other than, like, when you're a kid and one of the first Westerns you're going to show somebody, and one of the first I ever watched was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And you could say, oh, well, then that's just nostalgia. But it's like, no, the movie is impeccably shot. George Roy Hill, the transition from the opening, right, where it's in this sort of like white and brown aesthetic to then flipping to Technicolor, it's like kind of spectacular. Like I know it's not to the level of like the match cut in Lawrence of Arabia, but it's a pretty effortless transition into the rest of this movie. I love it, and ending always gets me because I wish they would get away, but they don't. And I wish that, and it was watching. I know Josh doesn't ever do what I'm about to say. Josh has never done this, but you know, when you're on YouTube and you watch Inside the Actors Studio, old clips, you know, because you never do that, right, Josh? No,
never at all.
And you watch Newman and you watch Redford talk about this movie. It's so important to the both of them. It's important, and they don't, and the switch is so important. Because if it was Redford playing Butch and Newman playing Sundance, I don't think this movie works at all. It's perfect for the way that they did it. So Butch Cassidy Sundance get my number 5.
I mean, it's a great option. That is a movie I have not seen in a very long time. I will admit I was very young when I first saw it, and I haven't revisited it lately. But obviously, it's incredible. It deserves its place as one of the great, not just one of the great westerns of all time, but just one of the greatest movies of all time.
Yeah, the fact that I have it at 5 and there's 4 others.
Yeah.
What is that? I mean, shit. What are those movies going to be?
I know that's actually very surprising that would be at number 5 because for a lot of people that's like considered
that's their number 1. That's the great
time.
Yeah, that's yeah. I mean it is. But these other 4 when I say them you're going to go, "Oh, I get it." You're number 4. Josh?
My number 4, I'm going to be a bit obvious with this one, but I can't deny how I feel about it because I really do think it's one of the greatest movies ever made. And that is Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven.
That's my number 3.
Yeah.
We can talk about it here.
I think that movie, what I love so much about it is that it, as you will see with a lot of my lists, it definitely is the kind of revisionist Western. But I also love that it's from Clint Eastwood. It's from a guy whose entire career is built on the foundation of the myth of the West. And here you have a story about a guy who is older. You know, he can't get around quite as well. He wants to get away from this violence, but is compelled back into it because, like, that's America for you. You just can't escape it. And it's all around you. It twists your soul up. And even the friendly faces that seem to want to be all for law and order, like they're corrupted as well. Like, oh my God, Gene Hackman is just so great in this movie. He is
Hackman.
Incredible. And it is once again one of those examples of a movie that uses the aesthetics of this genre so beautifully. Like, it's a gorgeous looking movie, but underneath it, the story is so powerful about how rampant that like darkness is within this setting, and how no matter what you do, you're always drawn back into it. And it's so upsetting, but really profound at the same time. And you know, Clint Eastwood is a filmmaker that I think sometimes can get very lazy in his storytelling.
You don't say.
Yeah, it's
he
very
can turn a movie under budget and under time. That's for sure.
Yeah, and
one take Clint. Yeah.
But to me, that's what makes it all the more impressive when you do get a movie that actually has so much to say thematically speaking. And I think that this is absolutely one of his best efforts. I think it's one of the best picture winners, as you can tell from our discussions in those ranking lists. I think that this is one of his greatest directorial achievements. I mean, honestly, you catch me on the right day, I will say it is my favorite movie from him. And I think that it is an incredible feat. And like, as I said, sometimes it's even shocking that something this complex came from Clint Eastwood. So I think it's just amazing.
It's either this or Bridges of Madison County for me. And
I also really love Letters from Iwo Jima, another movie that is like, how did this man who's so lazy direct a movie in another language? Like, how did this happen?
Yeah, that should be like off his ledger, and yet it completely works. No, I think that this is I think everything you said, Josh, is perfect. One of the central figures in the American Western, or just the Western genre period, is Clint Eastwood. The fact that he even made a bunch of Westerns, you know, he's High Plains Drifter and Pale Rider as a director, you know, and he's worked with Leone a ton throughout his career with those spaghetti westerns, and sort of also then too making Dirty Harry and becoming the tough, gritty, the character that we know to be Clint Eastwood. To then go ahead and make William Money, who's a completely vulnerable character, is incredible. And Hackman is insane in this movie.
Oh my God.
It's one of the best.
So great.
It's one of the best supporting actor wins of all time, in my opinion. The collision of the two of them at the end, because it is, yes, you're right, Josh. It is about a man who is tired of violence, and yet a violent world keeps knocking at his doorstep. And so the only way to resolve any of this is through a disgusting amount of violence that has to happen. And
it's so unsatisfying too. And I mean that in a way of like the resolution to this violence does not give you the uplifting, like, yeah, the bad guy.
No, it is
the good guy won.
It is
no,
a dark
like,
movie. It is a dark. It is not put a bow on it. He is a conflicted hero in a lot of ways, and it is actually a fascinating depiction of how the West is, which it is a very dark, violent, heartbreaking setting. And I know that a lot of movies that are in honorable mentions, or even, look at a movie like Butch and Sundance, we just talked about. That movie's got jokes and all this great dialogue and da-da-da-da-da. And it ends with both of them getting shot. Yeah. Probably like two pieces by the army at the end, So it's not always about, a bed of roses. And Eastwood understands that because he's been through this genre frontwards and backwards. I think it is Clint's best direction. I think it's his best film. And I think it's also one of his best performances. I think people don't talk enough about the sensitivity in the performance. Like, that's what I love about his work in $1 Million Baby, is again, Eastwood's sensitivity and vulnerability. You buy into it. In that film as well, too. That's what makes that movie good. So, yes, and this was at a time where he was a little bit more patient in how he made damn films rather than churning them out like he did in the 2000s and 2010s. So, and there just seemed to be a real purpose to want to make a movie like this. And it's one of those where, like, yeah, it's a movie talking about someone's career. It's also, like, extremely important cinema and one of the best films of the 90s. One of the best picture winners of all time, like you said. And it came out at, like, wasn't it like Unforgiven then Silence of the Lambs? Which is like in terms of winners, right? And then
Silence of the Lambs was first, and then
it's Unforgiven. Incredible back to back.
92 also just a pretty strong year for movies, just in general.
Good year. Very good year.
That movie. Oh God, I just love Unforgiven. And also,
you want to go watch it right now? We'll be right back. I was
watching a little bit of it earlier.
It sucks you in, doesn't it? It does.
Yeah, well, I just got the 4K of it too, and it just looks incredible. And I also just love that even though Clint Eastwood is not credited as the composer of this movie, that theme is 100% him.
Oh, it's 100%. He's tickling the ivories there.
Oh yeah, because it's always the same. I love playing this game with Clint Eastwood movies where you have to find the theme that he wrote, and it's always just like as you said, the little notes that come together.
Ding ding ding. It's just like little. It's like four piano keys.
There's Clint.
There's Clint.
He's in his basement on the piano, just typing away. Yep.
You sentimental son of a bitch. There you are.
Yeah, and that is absolutely the theme of this movie. Like I said, I know he's not officially credited, but there is no way you could tell me that he did not write that music.
Exactly. My number 4. Speaking of Clint Eastwood, he worked with a man pretty early in his career that made him big. And that was Sergio Leone, who is one of the masters of the genre. I didn't go with the films that he did with Eastwood. I actually went with a film that he did after those, and that's Once Upon a Time in the West.
Honorable mentions.
Which is one of the great sprawling epics. Talk about one of the great openings of all time.
Oh my God.
I don't know how he got away with it.
If that movie was just that opening, it would still be like one of the greatest movies of all
Oh, it
time.
would. Totally. And to me, it's, it's a great sort of indicator of how the genre is going to be, what it's going to become, post The Searchers, post this, post, going into the 70s. This is at 69. And, he, just the world building in this is incredible. The trains and the fights over like water rights and land, and it's a revenge film, and you've got kind of like all these four different characters sort of colliding, and it's bigger than anything he'd ever done. It's super vast. I think Charles Bronson and Henry Fonda are incredible. Fonda in this movie is insane. He plays such a stoic, distinctive villain throughout this movie, and
pretty against type for him too, because like you don't see Fonda playing villains all that much.
No, and it's flipping the sort of, because he had been in a lot of westerns, primarily My Darling Clementine, which is a really great John Ford film. For him to play this very layered villain in this movie, he's incredible in this movie, Josh. And this is some of the best direction of all time, period. Yeah. Like what Leone's doing here is taking all the goodwill of the Man with No Name trilogy and elevating that to a point where, did I just make the greatest Western of all time at this point? Maybe. I don't know. But it's, I think the way in which he makes this movie, it's just damn special. It's such a great movie. So
it feels like a real leveling up from that trilogy, which is already great, but this one does feel like it is so much more impressive, honestly, in terms of filmmaking, in terms of storytelling. And yeah, I agree with you. As I said, it didn't quite make my list, but it was on a very long list of honorable mentions, and it's incredible.
I also just love that it's a sneaky film about sort of, the exploitation of workers and tycoons, and sort of just how we in the Western, in America, exploit people. And it's a very prickly film too. It just got put on 4K, so I highly recommend everybody go and get it. I thought it was a pretty amazing transfer as well. So, Josh, we've done your number 4. We're heading to your number 3. We already done my number 3 as well. So your number 3, sir.
So my number 3 is a movie that I'm going to guess you are going to be very surprised is on this list.
All right.
Because my number 3 is McCabe and Mrs. Miller.
Whoa, wow. Mr. I don't like Robert Altman.
Yes.
Put the Robert Altman movie on his list. Okay.
Yep. This is the major exception when it comes to Robert Altman for me, because yes, I don't really love his movies all that much, but there is something about McCabe and Mrs. Miller that just really, really works for me. And I think it does go back to, once again, how the aesthetics, I think, are just great. I love that town that they exist in that's so isolated and cold and just dirty all the time, but it's great. I love it. I love that it's actually on like the West Coast. That's another thing that I think is not really explored so much in Westerns, but like I don't know, there's something about being on the West Coast during that time too that I just find so fascinating. And story-wise, I mean, this is very much the anti-Western that we normally see. We do not get any heroic characters here. I love that Warren Beatty is playing this sleazeball who is just trying his best to weasel his way into fortune, but he's kind of not even very smart in doing it. He just has kind of good luck until it runs out, and he's just such an idiot. But I love that he's an idiot. I love that he is somebody that is just taking advantage of any opportunity he can until his luck runs out, and he just tries so much to worm his way out of it. But like his victory is not sort of like with Unforgiven, is not celebrated at all. It's very down and dark, but that's just the world that he exists in. And I love that this is an examination of people who are just trying to get by in this setting that we know very much from like westerns that we've seen before, but it is not the same. It's so dark and like literally in some cases, but like these characters are nobody is virtuous, everybody is sleazy, but that's what makes them fascinating. And I just find witnessing that to be so riveting. And even as the giant Altman skeptic that I am, this is the one case where it's like the pieces just sort of fall together for me. And it really, really works, especially with those Leonard Cohen songs.
Josh is my number one. That's not a secret. I love Robert Altman. This is my favorite Altman. This is one of my favorite films. It's like my top 5 films of all time. I saw this in college, and it kind of blew away my mind of what the Western could be, which is just a super cynical, dangerous, violent chase for the American dream. And this is a giant, giant, giant influence on There Will Be Blood, another one of my favorite films of all time. I go back. Obviously, I love There Will Be Blood. This is the better film, I think. And I agree with you. I think
I got to think about that.
It's tough, but I do think that this is the better film. And I agree with you because you have this guy, Warren Beatty, McCabe, he is the ultimate shoe salesman. He's this guy coming in essentially to provide gambling, prostitution, make his way in the West. You have Miss McCabe who comes in and it becomes his partner, lover, companion. And when the railroads companies come in to try to buy him up, he foolishly lowballs them, treats them, sort of terribly. And at that point, there is no negotiating. And I find that to be the harsh reality of, well, if you don't want to negotiate, then your dream's done. And
God, that scene where he is talking with the bounty hunter is,
yes.
Oh my God, it is so great.
Because it's terrifying.
The power dynamic between them is so stark, and you could just feel the desperation knowing that he has made this giant mistake in what he's up against now, and just once again trying to find a way out of it. But that dude is just not going to let it happen, and it's kind of hard to watch at times, but it's so fascinating.
Beatty is incredible. Christie's phenomenal. The Cohen music used adds this sort of dreamlike quality to the film. It's perfect. Every time he uses it is perfect uses of those needle drops. The shootout at the end in the snow mixed with the fire at the church, perfect symbolism, perfect understanding of these gangsters, these this violence is going on over here, but the innocence of this town is being lost at the same time, even though that the innocence of that town is put together by gamblers and sex workers. Yeah, and sex workers. There is a giant juxtaposition of that, and it's purposeful. Altman making the anti-Western and having to make that in Canada, you know what I mean, to shoot most of it there. Rightfully so, no studio wanted to touch this thing, but it's one of the great American films of all time. I watched the 4K recently, and it's a pretty damn good movie. It's a pretty great. I want that coat from Warren Beatty.
That coat.
One of the most
Chicago. I could really use that.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it's an all-time coat. It's an all-time Criterion cover. Good for them. And I think
it's the only Robert Altman movie I own.
Is that the only one you own?
Yeah.
That's fair. But no, it's an immaculate movie, and it's again another one that it ends with him dead in the snow, and it ends with her in the opium den, and it's kind of just like, oh man, and it's super sad, but you're just like, damn, this is a good movie. This is like how movies should be.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of, this is actually obviously very much later and it's a TV show, but the show Deadwood, I don't know if you've ever seen that,
really,
but it reminded me a lot of Deadwood, which is probably my favorite show of all time too. So it's a shout out for anybody who hasn't seen Deadwood. If you like McCabe and Mrs. Miller, absolutely check that one
Deadwood.
out.
I love Deadwood. That's not surprising that I've seen Deadwood, and I never got to see the Deadwood movie though. Never watched.
I didn't either. I wanted to. I just never got around to it. But that show, I think, it honestly might be my favorite show of all time.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Not mine, but definitely like in a top 10, 15 conversation for sure.
Yeah, but I do think that there are some thematic similarities between it and McCabe. I think it even sort of is the same generalish setting because that also is on the West Coast, kind of in the Northwest area. So, and I just think that the way that it looks at the changing environment of this time, and you have characters who are very flawed and not heroic, but they get by in this way that's so fascinating. I do think that there are similarities in terms of like what they're thematically exploring between the two projects. And yeah, McCabe and Mrs. Miller it's amazing that it could even be the one exception for me as being like not that into Altman's work, but for whatever reason, this one really does it for me.
This episode's been full of surprises, and I'm so happy right now. I don't know if you guys can tell I'm just so proud of Josh right now.
I do feel a little bad that I took your number one so early.
No, it's okay. Hey, if that means that you put it on your list, I'm totally okay with that. Well, then we're going from your number 3 to your number 2.
My number 2 is The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
Josh, did you look at my list before this? It's my number 2 as well.
I had a feeling that there was going to be more crossover.
Normally
when I do these lists, I actually don't have too much crossover with other people, but
you don't have a lot of crossover with me sometimes, but
I had a feeling that this one might. Yeah, I mean, and especially if you talk about revisionist Westerns, this kind of feels like, one of the earliest examples that we had of that to a degree. And the fact that it came from people who are also responsible for building up that myth themselves feels even more significant. And I remember watching this movie when I was younger, and my first impression was that Lee Marvin is just incredible in this. Because I think he is just an exceptional villain, and I love that character. But thematically, you get it all at the end of that movie when the legend becomes fact. Print the legend. Like that is the Western right there. I mean, it's a lot of stuff in American history, honestly, but for Westerns in particular, that is what it's all about. It's all about uplifting the legend of these characters, the myth of the heroism that people went through. But when you actually look back at that time, it's a lot of people that got lucky in some instances, that changed things around, that flat out lied in order to create a portrait of these grand figures that just never existed. Yeah. And that's fascinating in and of itself. Like, that's just great storytelling right there. But the fact that it is also from John Ford and John Wayne, and, to a lesser extent, you can include Stewart in there, but mainly Ford and Wayne, people who are so heavily tied into that myth of the West. And for them to come out and say they're going to make a project that absolutely demolishes like everything that they have built towards. Although I'm willing to bet that John Ford knew about that more than John Wayne did, because John Wayne didn't sound like a very smart person.
Correct.
Even though I would say John Wayne actually good actor. I think
John Wayne
deserves a lot of credit for
John Wayne. John Wayne is a good actor. He's an absolute shit human being. So we can just.
I'm not endorsing anything of his like political opinions, but I'm going to be honest. Like, John Wayne, definition of a movie star. Like, every time he walked on screen, I'm sorry, that man had so much like screen presence that there's no way for me to say that he was not a movie star. Like, you can think whatever you want about him politically, but I think as an actor, as a presence in those movies, it's so large and looming, and it's impossible not to be captivated by him.
When you think of the Western, you think of two people. You think of, as movie stars, you think of Clint Eastwood and you think of John Wayne, period, in the story. So I agree with you. No. I mean, Josh, it is a masterpiece. It's Ford's best film, which says a lot, because John Ford has made tons of masterpieces. And yes, it's like he's made The Searchers. He's made, he's made Stagecoach. He has made Westerns over and over and over again throughout his career. He's made films with John Wayne throughout his career. And yet he's making one here that is kind of pointing the camera back at himself, and he's pointing it at Wayne, the legacy that they built, and understanding that we have taken a genre and we have made heroes out of it, but these aren't the real heroes. The real heroes here at times are just good people, but sometimes also those good people get a name off the back of other people that are even better, and that their names are lost in the history books. We're going to talk about John Wayne and John Ford the rest of our lives, and to an extent as well, Jimmy Stewart. But there's other, I was thinking a lot about this because Ford was always at the cutting. I mean, this is the guy that made The Grapes of Wrath. So this isn't one of those guys that I think at times politically would be on the side of. In his filmmaking, it didn't seem like he was on the side of Wayne a lot, because he made really subversive films at times against the political world that we were living in at that time. And this is definitely the case of, like, the American myth is a lie, and the American and what we tell ourselves in our history books can be a lie because we're the ones writing the damn stories, and there's a caution and a danger to that. And I think Jimmy Stewart is incredible in this. And Stewart as an actor made really savvy political choices. And this is a guy that became a hero, realized he was becoming a hero, and is finally fed up with the idea of living a lie. He's a politician with so much power. He finally tells the truth. He's potentially in a marriage that is built off of a lie as well. Everything that he has is dedicated to this man, and they come home and he tells the truth, and the guy takes the story and just rips it up and says nobody would want to read that, because then that takes away hope. And it's like, it's the balance of, do you keep a lie going in order for the truth? And it's one of the most fascinating storytelling dilemmas you have. And I think that the kitchen, or like the scene in the restaurant, is classic. It's a classic.
I love it when John Wayne kicks that dude.
When he kicks him in the face?
I love it.
I said, you, Liberty, pick it up.
I love it so much.
I love Jimmy Stewart stumbling to pick up that steak, and he slaps it on there. And now
which he actually trips too.
Yes, he does.
And it's like, oh my god, that actually is Jimmy Stewart falling on the floor.
And Ford keeps it in because, like, that's human. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's just great instinct. But yeah, I just love that it is, again, the West is built off of myths and myth making. So you have as grand of a myth making to essentially, like, Stewart could be the next president of the United States, and it's built off of killing a man in the West. Like, that's the argument at him being the representative, right, for their state. It's like his claim to fame is killing a man. And it's like, well, that's no different than anybody else here. And yet he never did it, which speaks to that person, but also speaks to then John Wayne. They're incredible performances. It's one of Wayne's best performances because it's dark. It's sad, super sad. And it's completely vulnerable, which is something he didn't do. He had that stoic, like, I am the good guy. And Ford was able to get these nasty characters out of him. Like The Searchers, he is playing a vile human being in that movie. And yet he is one of your protagonists. He is a shell of himself by the end. And you're kind of wondering how it took him even that long to not drink himself to death, because he died of a broken heart because of the decision that he made here. It's a wonderful movie. Again, another movie I picked up on 4K, and I watched it recently, and I love that movie a lot. So
it's incredible. I remember watching, like, I put the 4K on not too long ago, like even before this discussion, just to be like, I just got it and I just wanted to watch a little bit of it just to see what the transfer was.
You watched the whole damn thing, didn't you?
I watched the whole thing. Yeah. I was so glued to the screen and the storytelling. It's like, I just got to finish this. And
I can see,
I just have to,
I can see
Lee Marvin. So
incredible. Good. I can see why Sammy Fableman really likes John Ford.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I mean? So, that's so stupid. All right. That was my number 2. My number 1 was obviously McKay Miss Miller. Josh, your number 1. I think I know what it is, but Josh, go ahead. Your number 1.
Yeah. So my number 1, there really was no other option for me for this particular spot, because this is one of my favorite movies of all time. Sometimes I go back and forth whether or not this is my favorite movie of the particular decade that it came out in.
Mm-hmm.
Funnily enough, it fights with another movie from this exact same year, which shows you how strong that particular year was.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that is the very long title, The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford.
It was in my 6 to 10.
Yeah, this movie, I think, is a flat out masterpiece. And it's one of those instances where I had that feeling like the moment I saw it, from the very first time I saw it back in 2007, I knew I was watching a masterpiece. Because one, it looks gorgeous. I mean, you have that Deacon cinematography, obviously, but just the entire production design and just the
costume design in that movie is so distinct.
Oh my God. Yeah. Was my personal costume design winner too. Like the aesthetics are just incredible. But at the center, you have a very complicated story about 2 men who are viewing like their status of fame in very different ways, and their status of notoriety and how they exist within the framework of American mythology. And you have Jesse James, who's right in it, but is tired of it. It's getting in his head. He is becoming unhinged from it, but he's also really broken down by it. And you've got Robert Ford, who is just obsessed with it. And that's all that is driving him. Every single decision that he makes is to get on that plane. And of course, once he does, we see how it destroys him too, and destroys those around him as well. And I just find that to be such an invigorating exploration from a storytelling perspective. I love those characters, and I love what it has to say about not only just that particular time period, and as we have talked about, sort of those building up of myths, but I think that's very applicable to today. And I remember people talking, in 2007, they kind of put it in the framework of like celebrity worship. But I just think, just in terms of what you strive for in life, like the things that you try to implement to get you to this particular plane. And once you get there, like you have to reckon with everything that you did in order to arrive at that place. I just think that is always going to be fascinating storytelling that works within multiple concepts and settings, and marrying it with what we get in this film, with just how beautiful those vistas are, but contrasting it with how dark these characters' arcs are at the same time, just masterful to me. And I think that this is, as I said, one of my favorite movies of all time. It's incredible. I love everything about it, head to toe. It's absolutely great. And it was, as I said, no other option for me in terms of what was going to be my number 1.
It's Dominic's masterpiece. Andrew Dominic's in a penalty box for a while for his last film for me. But this movie is, Josh, have I ever told you the story of that I saw this on a double feature in 2007? I saw Michael Clayton and the assassination of Jesse
That
James.
did come out around the same time.
Yeah, they were the same weekend they released out in my neck of the woods, and I saw Michael Clayton first, and then I saw this, and it was like my mind was blown. I was like, I don't know how you can watch two masterpieces like this back to back and get away with it. I think it's a perfect companion with the film we just talked about, which is The Man That Shot Liberty Valance. This is a movie about one of the central figures of the American West. And Pitt gets, I don't think, nearly enough credit for his performance here because everyone was so gobsmacked by Casey Affleck's wonderful performance in this movie. And rightfully so.
Well, he was sort of the discovery. I mean, he'd been working for a while, but nobody really knew he had that kind of a performance.
But Pitt is insanely spectacular in this movie because, like you're saying, there's this sorrow in him and this regret of what happens when you become famous, what happens when you become this person. It becomes like machine work. You become crazy. You become, he becomes super dangerous, not to everybody around him as well, but to himself. And he's a ticking clock as to when he's going to combust and either someone's going to take him out or he's going to take himself out. And then you balance that with Affleck, who is completely obsessive, almost to the point of like romanticizing him and wanting to be with him.
I mean, he watches him while he's bathing. Like,
yes, he does. It is
an undercurrent there.
There is super undercurrents of that. And then you have my favorite performance in the film, which is Sam Rockwell.
Oh, he's so good.
Who is swallowed up by the both of them and swallowed up by the entire tsunami that is Jesse James and then Robert Ford's murder of Jesse James. And I love that this movie doesn't end with him just killing him. And then it kind of, any other movie would just sit there and say, as a matter of fact, like, this is what we're getting to. It is the assassination of Jesse James. But the great part of this movie is the second part of that title, by the coward Robert Ford. And that's what he is known for in his legend. And what you see here is a person that gets that fame for killing a legend. And the world rejects that.
Even though we know Jesse James was a bad dude. We see him do bad things in the movie.
Absolutely.
It does not celebrate him at all.
No, but
you killed the legend. Yeah.
But there's something romantic and something. It's like John Dillinger. Purvis killed Dillinger. He was not considered a hero, except by people inside the FBI. You know what I mean? To the American public, he killed an icon. He killed a legend. And there's consequences to that. And there's an aftermath. And something like, we were talking about Michael Mann before the show, and just, talking about, because I recently we watched Heat and I had to tell Josh. But we were talking about Public Enemies and how that movie, that movie ends with the killing of Dillinger, and that's it. And we don't get to see how that effect really takes place afterwards, and how that affects America, and how that affects all the people that James was around. But we see this through Robert, and how he's got the life, and he's got the wife, and he's got the name, and he did what he did, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Because now he's, like you're saying, he's in this pit of sorrow by the end because he never got what he wanted. And Dominic is so patient in allowing you to feel that. And this is a 3-hour movie, right? And it's purposeful in that runtime to make you understand the duality between where they both end up in their lives. So I think that, Dominic made a really bad movie a couple years ago, and I'll never see that movie ever again. But I revisit this one every now and then because it is so majestic and it's breathtakingly beautiful. It's some of Deakins' best work as a cinematographer. Period. End of story.
He should have won the Oscar for this in that year. I know it's a very competitive cinematography year in 2007, but I think that this is his best work.
Oh, that's tough because he has, doesn't he have well, he didn't do, no, he did do No Country, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Was he double nommed?
Yeah, he was.
And he still lost to There Will Be Blood, which is also like,
I mean, I can't complain too much.
What the hell do you do there? Also, what do you do? Yeah. Like
I said before, 2007 cinematography is like one of the greatest lineups.
It's like Zodiac didn't even get nominated. And you're like, what the hell? What, you know?
Yeah.
And wasn't Atonement nominated?
Atonement and then Diving Bell and the Butterfly. Yeah. Like I just
those are beautiful films.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's really something when Deakins has 2 nominations and he loses, and you're still like, I mean, I get it.
But I could get it. You know? Like, it wasn't his year. I get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like, you know how strong your competition has to be when you have to say that? Like, that's incredible.
Yeah, when you have 3 masterpieces in the lineup and you're just like, God, I guess I got to flip a coin here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I love his work. And as you said, the movie itself is just so beautiful, but also in that very bittersweet way. Because oftentimes I will go on YouTube and just seek out the ending to the movie.
Hell
where you
yeah.
get that just wonderful narration, which I think is just employed so well throughout the movie, but especially towards the end when it is describing his own death. And most of it is about how the other guy who committed his own murder had so much support and was pardoned later. And of course, there's this very sorrowful reading about how, you know, there's no eulogies for Bob. Nobody's going to stand outside to take pictures of his corpse or go to where he was living.
Jesus.
And it's so tragic and so sad, but that's what makes it so powerful at the end too.
And it makes it so honest. It's just like, you wanted all of this and you're not going to get it. Because some people aren't born to get it. No matter how hard they try, Josh, some people are just not going to be stars. They're not going to be legends.
Yeah.
So there's something in the stars that align up. And usually 9 times out of 10, when you try to create that, doesn't end up well. It's a masterpiece. I can't argue that. I can't argue.
I want that 4-hour cut.
Yeah, he's got that held hostage right now, doesn't he?
Yeah, well, I think it's a Warner Brothers thing, probably.
Yeah, that should be on a 4K.
Yeah, like if I'm not gonna get the 4-hour cut, at least give me a 4K, because that movie deserves that picture quality.
That year, there are so many movies like There Will Be Blood, No Country, Zodiac, Jesse James, that don't have 4K releases. And I feel like those would be flying off the shelves. That year is so built for people like us that just love movies.
Well, I think There Will Be Blood is coming to 4K soon.
Yeah?
I think I did hear that.
God, I need that. I need it.
Yeah, but Jesse James, that's a big one for me. It's like I just
imagine
like that would do very well too. I think that would sell.
Can you imagine if like Criterion did a 4K of Jesse James? How well that would
that's
sell?
what everybody wants, but
Yeah.
I think that's another one where Dominic has said there's roadblocks to that happening too.
It's like the I'm Not There thing. I need just a Blu-ray of I'm Not There because that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist. And I'm like, come on, Todd, let's go. That year is amazing. I know we talk about 99 being such a great year. 2007's right there with it. There is
absolutely agree.
So many goddamn good movies in that year. And it's very important, I think, for our generation that year as well.
Yeah, 2007 is an incredible year for movies.
Josh, honorable mentions that you have before we get out of here.
Oh boy, there's so many.
there's too many.
A lot. Yeah. Okay, so just a brief selection. I do really like the Coens' True Grit. I think that's actually a really good movie. I
do too.
Much prefer it to the original.
Correct. I do as well.
The 60s version.
Yeah, I love Matt Damon in that movie.
Damon's great.
Damon's getting something in there. Good for him. Yeah.
So I really like that. The Wild Bunch was another one. I mean, Sam Peckinpah just in general. I was talking about violence. Nobody did violence quite like Sam Peckinpah.
Peckinpah feels like a director watch filmography to come down the road. It's gonna
I think
happen.
so.
Jay's a big fan of Peckinpah. So am I.
Yeah, I am too. I really like him, and I think the Wild Bunch is incredible. Also another one was the Oxbow incident, which
Ooh.
is a it's one of those situations where like it is obviously it takes place during the this Western time period, but I feel like the story it's telling is not exactly what we think about when it comes to Westerns, but I also feel it is one of the greatest examinations of the death penalty that I've ever seen in a movie. And I find it to be so powerful in that regard. I just really think that it just hits me in a really, really profound way. And like I said, it's not like a traditional Western, but I think just in terms of at least of how we think of Westerns, but the themes that it's exploring, I just find to be so impactful. And then there was one that is this is definitely more on the fun side, and it's another one where you can't technically call it a Western because it does not take place in America, but it has all of the aesthetic hallmarks of a Western. And I also just find it to be a very fun movie, but because it didn't really fit within the framework, I didn't necessarily count it. And that's this movie called The Good, the Bad, the Weird.
Oh yeah.
So, as I said, it's not technically a Western because it's not in America, but it's 1800s. It has trains and people on horses and cowboy attire. So it definitely is meant to evoke that, even though it takes place in Korea around that time. But like so frenetic, but very fun and looks great. So it was a movie that, like, in terms of the fun options of that genre, I really, really enjoyed that one.
It's a good movie. It's a good movie. All right. Let's do the laundry list.
Yeah.
I said No Country for Old Men. I stand by that. The Gunfighter. Tombstone. Mentioned that earlier.
That was an honorable mention too.
You tell him I'm coming, and hell's coming with me.
Outcomer is so good.
One of the great Western performances of all time. Like if we were doing Western performances, he'd be in the top 5.
Yeah.
I mean,
should have got nominated for it.
I'm your Huckleberry. Yeah, way better than what fucking Dennis Quaid was doing in Wyatt Earp. Fucking don't even know what he's doing.
I mean,
there.
Wyatt Earp just in general.
That movie sucks. Movie. That is a 3-hour movie, and it's just terrible. Costner's awful as Wyatt Earp, but goddamn, like Russell is so good in that movie. And if he did direct that movie, Josh, why the hell isn't he making more movies? That movie is impeccably directed. And it's lean and mean and quick and fast and entertaining. Open Range, Costner's film. Mm-hmm. That's great because of Duvall. Robert Duvall's it's the showcase there, and he's really good. The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, A Few Dollars More. Those are the two of the of that trilogy that I like. Not a big fan of A Fistful of Dollars. Not a big fan of that one. No. It's fine. The Proposition, it's the one with Guy Pearce. Fantastic film.
The one that's like not technically a Western because it's in Australia, but it has all the same.
But it has all the same trappings. Yeah.
Yeah.
Meek's Cutoff. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid.
Of course.
For Jay, I know Jay's not here, but I haven't seen the film personally. It's one of the Peckinpahs I haven't seen, but I'm going to shout it out. Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. Mm-hmm. 40 Guns, 310 to Yuma, whichever version you want.
Yep, they're both great.
They're both great. The Rider, Kelly Zhao's film.
Okay, yeah, so that was another one where I was like...
It straddles the line, but it's really talking about the cowboy there a lot.
Yeah, it's just contemporary setting is...
Yeah, I know. The Magnificent Seven, The Quick and the Dead...
Yep, that was another honorable mention.
I know that There Will Be Blood, talked about that. Contemporary setting for this one, I know, but Brokeback Mountain, The Power of the Dog.
Yeah, Brokeback is another one where it's like
straddles it.
I love that movie, but it is more about the...
It's more of a... you see it more as a romance? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is. It's a deconstruction of cowboy, the Western cowboy ideas. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I feel like that's more of a like purely thematic level, and all of the like cowboy stuff is just aesthetic to me. I love that movie, but
if somebody said it, I wouldn't get mad at it. I'm not gonna,
Yeah, I feel like that is just
why it's in an honorable mention.
Stretching the definition of a Western. To me, No Country, I can absolutely understand you calling that a Western. I don't think Brokeback is really a Western.
What about Nope? Would you put Nope on there? See, so people have been no. That's something I
I
saw
know.
online. People are like,
I
Nope, and I'm
know.
like, I'm
It
like,
was on an IndieWire list.
it was on that.
You
So
know
was
what,
Broke.
what?
So was Brokeback.
Yeah, I know. You know
Yeah.
what wasn't on that list of 100 movies? Jesse James.
I think that it has a little bit to do with Blonde more than that has. I think that there's some movies that were on that. There were some. Let's just say it. There were some movies on that list. I sat there and I went, "The fuck are you doing?" But
I'm just saying, if we're,
that's an IndieWire list, though.
I mean, yeah, I don't want to get too much into it.
HUD, Shane, Treasure of Sierra Madre, Silverado, Dead Man.
Oh, Silverado's so good.
Silverado, so good. Dead Man, Red River, Pale Rider, High Plains Drifter, Winchester 73. Have you ever seen that one? It's a really good one. Jimmy Stewart. Johnny Guitar, that was the number one on the list. Shout out to Sophia, that's one of her favorites. Rio Bravo, absolutely incredible film. Jeremiah Johnson, The Stagecoach, or Stagecoach, sorry, not The Stagecoach, Stagecoach. My Darling Clementine, like I mentioned earlier, and Blazing Saddles.
Yep,
That's a Western.
it is a Western.
And it's Western, and it's great. And talk about a Western comedy that making fun of itself, and I know that Josh's favorite, A Million Ways to Die in the West, right? With Seth MacFarlane, right?
Great movie. Was it one of the worst movie-going experiences that I've ever had? Because there's nothing quite like watching a comedy with a room full of people and nobody laughs. Like that is, I would not wish that.
Pin drop, baby.
It is one of the worst experiences you could ever have in a movie theater. No, that's terrible.
It's crazy that Seth MacFarlane made a Quiet Place movie.
Yeah,
before the Quiet Place movies came out.
Yeah. Well, if you want to talk about goofy Westerns, the day that we are recording this is the 25th anniversary of Wild Wild West.
I was just going to say, we didn't talk about Wild Wild West and how much
wasn't going to legitimately
come
put
on.
it on the list. Like,
come on.
I mean, I wasn't going to
put it on a list. Yeah.
But I mean, I will certainly say it is a very important movie to me. At 9 years old, it was literally my favorite movie of all time.
Yeah.
And I'm going to admit, it's not perfect. It definitely has some flaws in it.
What are you talking about? Is that perfect? Wild Wild West?
But I still enjoy that movie. I do. I love steampunk also. I think that's another reason why I kind of like the aesthetics of Westerns, because it can veer into steampunk-ish, territory at times. And that's all that Wild Wild West is. And,
the Wild Wild West. The Wild Wild West.
I know all the words.
I know you do know all the words to the song. We're not going to sing. I'm not going to put you on the spot.
No, we're not going to do that. But trust me, if called upon, I can tell you.
Is that your go-to karaoke song?
I mean, it would be. Yeah,
okay.
I could do it.
I need to come to Chicago now and do karaoke with Josh. Bartender, play Wild Wild West.
Yeah, that very highly requested song. Yeah.
I know it's on the rotation regularly. So, Josh, can you tell everybody where they can find you and all your work on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd at JR Parham, and you can also find all of my work on Next Best Picture and AwardsWatch.
One of also the most insane supporting performances ever is Kenneth Branagh in Wild Wild West. It is. I
love Kenneth Branagh on that movie. He is so unhinged, and it's great. I love
He literally did that so then he could get to what he's been doing with Tenet and stuff like that later.
It's look. Wild Wild
he
West
loves ham.
Great movie. Yeah.
Listen, the sodium count at the Branagh house is insane, because that is a ham sandwich of a performance.
And it's great. It's absolutely incredible
to
watch him in that movie.
Honestly, I got to tell you this. I wish more movies from the studios were as wild and weird in its choices as Wild Wild West. I'm not saying it's a perfect movie, but at least it's making choices that are relatively entertaining and interesting and subverting the mold of what a Will Smith movie can be at that time. And that
movie does have some very fundamental flaws to it, and I think actually one of them is that Will Smith is playing Jim West, because it doesn't make any sense for him to be playing that character at that time period.
No.
but I think that movie still has some good things about it that I enjoy.
Kevin Kline doing dual performances. There's a lot. There's a giant. You like giant spiders? Again, steampunk. Go watch it. Why not? What's hurting you? Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Ryan McQuade 77. You can find all my work at AwardsWatch.com. If you like podcasts and you like podcasts about Will Smith, this week on Director Watch, we're talking about Enemy of the State. Coincidentally, there you go. Josh, what is Will Smith's best movie or your favorite Will Smith movie? Like, what is his?
This was going around lately.
This is going around here at Awards Watch. Like, it was because of this episode. We asked this question. Yeah. It's really tough.
His best movie, I think I gotta say Men in Black.
Yeah. But in that,
I think it's like a perfect blockbuster because that movie is also like 90 minutes too. It's pretty short.
Same with like Wild Wild West. That's like an hour 40. It's not that long.
Yeah. But Men in Black packs in so much storytelling in a very short amount of time, and it does so really effectively. Like, that's the thing. It's so effectively delivered in terms of where the characters are going, where the plot is. And even though that movie actually had like some post-production kind of meddling where they tried to simplify some things, normally that'd be a recipe for disaster, but they were correct. They made it so much better. I think it is a perfect movie in terms of like that broadly appealing summer blockbuster. Doesn't get much better than that.
It's just really tough because for movie stars, and this is what Jay said on the movie star draft a couple weeks ago and on this episode coming up, this is a little teaser for everybody. For someone as great of a movie star as Will Smith is, he should have maybe a couple of movies in there that are undeniable masterpieces, like every other movie star does. And instead, he has a lot of really fun or really just good movies and a lot of stinkers. And there's not an undeniable, like, you know, when you look at like Cruise, right? Or you look at, throw a movie star out there right now. They've at least got one in their arsenal. You know, Men in Black's probably the closest, right? But you don't see a lot of like
prestige.
No, exactly. It's not like you would see a lot of lists of the greatest movies of all time, and Men in Black could be argued on the list. You know what I mean? So we'll have more on that later this week. Robert Daniels is our guest on that show. What else? Oh, if you iTunes, Spotify, 5-star reviews, greatly appreciate it. Or on the website, sign up for the newsletter. It's the best place to get all the news, reviews, interviews, podcasts sent to you guys throughout the week. Next week, we will be back. We will be reviewing Maxine, and we will be talking about our favorite movies set in Los Angeles. So thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you all next time.